when I set a table, it's with so much anticipation that a good time is to be had. A time to share a meal, a conversation, a moment with people I care for, or new friends. There's so much excitement in the act of preparing for a coming together of people. And the invite list, well, sometimes it's very specially curated for the occasion, but typically, anyone is welcome, always. Actually, that's not true. Nobody wants to set a table for people that they don't want to associate with. I mean, you can't celebrate if you're too busy being resentful. And there's never a good time to be had when the knives are too busy cutting the tension in the air instead of the meal in front of them. So no, some people don't get the invite. It's their fault, really. Last time I set a table, it was for Jesus. And the 12 he did life with. We didn't realize it was just hours before he would be arrested on false charges. And then, there was a lot we didn't know back then, especially about the 12. I remember it. He sat here and he said out loud, "Truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." And everyone looked at each other, confused. And Judas was so trusted that nobody even thought to look his way. I think of all the Judases in my life, the people I know just like him, people I've called friend, people I've called family. I'm sure you know. We've all been there. Betrayal by somebody you love and trust is painful. And then there was Matthew. Matthew. I mean, we should have known, right? He is a tax collector, and you know about them. But it doesn't make sense. He was there from the very beginning. All of the miracles, all of the ministry. He even set a table just like this for his own friends who, not good people. And Jesus was there. And you could see this life change, this love, this something different, freedom in Matthew's life because of his relationship with Jesus. He was the friend that was always there until he wasn't. As soon as the going got tough, Matthew was gone. Setting this table, I don't think I would have any of them back. And as for the Matthews and the Judases in my own life, no. But what blows my mind, Jesus, before he even sat here, he knew them. He knew them individually beyond what any of us could see. He knew what was, and he knew what was going to come. He knew that they were going to sell him out. He knew that they were going to betray him. He knew that they were going to lead him to the very people he knew that when it counted, when it mattered the most, they were going to be anywhere but by his side. And still, They were welcome at the table. Always. The hard pill for me to swallow in all this is not recognizing how much I probably relate to Judas and Matthew. I know I've been that friend. The hardest part it's realizing how very little I am like Jesus.
Well, hey, good morning. Welcome to 1128 Community. My name is Mike. If we haven't had the chance to meet yet, and this was a really powerful thing, wasn't it? Yeah, that was incredible. And that kind of came together just as Natalia and I were talking through the message this weekend. And we said, we want to help people understand the significance of the table. We want to help people understand what love and grace looks like at the table that Jesus set, because we want this to be a place where love and grace are just flowing out of here. That's our hope as a church, is that we could lead with love and extend extra grace to all, because we could all use a little extra grace sometimes, the grace that Jesus had at a table like this. And I'm glad that you're here today. It's really our mission, our hope, that you would be able to do life different, and that we'd be able to help you set some rhythms and some values with Jesus at the center. It's our hope that this would be a safe place, a grace-filled place where you could explore what a relationship with Jesus might look like, or what a deeper relationship with Jesus might look like. Now, last week we jumped into this new series called At the Table, and last week we said that Jesus sets a place for everyone. Like, there is room for one more. There's always space for one more at the table that Jesus sets. And last week we said there's even room for guys or gals like James and John, the two brothers, the sons of thunder, the ones that were angry and opportunistic. There was room for them there, and if that's you, there's room for you at this table as well. And last week, I started off by sharing about the table that sits at my parents' house. I shared that it has 100 years worth of history, that it was my grandmother's table, and before that it was her parents' table. And it's really neat for me to be able to see my kids now making memories at a table that has gone on through so many generations. And one day I anticipate that it'll have a new generation sitting at it as well. And there's lots of memories at that table, and that table is really an important piece of my family history. It's not just important to me, but I think it's important to my sisters because they fight over who's going to get it one day. It's important to my mom, and before her mom. The table is an important piece. It represents connection. It represents memories. Now, what's interesting is I've been married into a family now for 13 years that also has a table. It's in Mendota, Illinois, and I think about that table as a new set of memories. It's a different table. I don't know if there's 100 years worth of history at that table, but for me, there's 13 years of history at that table that I can look back on. I think about that table, and I think about Colleen's papa, who used to sit there, and he'd ask for dessert right after dinner finished. The plate wasn't even fully off the table yet, and he'd be asking, is there dessert? We'd play cards, and he would knock on the table with his two fingers, and that was his way of saying he's going to pass. I think about Colleen's brother and sister, who they always are fighting for who's number one. They've always got to be the best. And at that table, no matter what the card game was, they always had to outdo the other one. I think about aunts and uncles who come and visit from halfway around the world and sit at that table, and we have special meals with them, and it's a good time just creating new memories. I think about the first time that I tried Grandma's famous meatballs, and if you want to know about those meatballs, just ask Colleen and I as two kids, because they love They're Gigi's meatballs. There's so many memories around that table, a table that I've only known for 13 years. And as I compared and contrasted the two tables in my life that have a little bit of significance, I realized it's not necessarily the table itself that's important. No, what's important are the people that are seated at the table. It's not about the table. It's about the people who sit at the table. And at the table in Mendota, Illinois, it's kind of about me, the outsider that was welcomed in by a family that has their own history and their own memories well established there. They welcomed me in. And for 13 years, I've been able to have my own memories at that table. I think some of us, or maybe all of us, I don't want to assume, but I think a lot of us, we have memories at tables. Maybe it's a small kitchen table. I remember the small kitchen table that was in my grandparents' house. My granny and my papa, it was just a small table, and we'd get up early when we spent the night at their house, and my papa would have that crunchy, cinnamon-flavored French toast ready to go for us. And those were some of my best memories there. I think that we all have tables or places that we think about, like those connections, the people that we were doing life with. Maybe you sit at the head of some of those tables. Maybe you sit at the end of some of those tables. Maybe you're the inviter. You said, hey, come and join me for this meal or this card game or this thing that's happening at our table. Or maybe you are the invited. Maybe you've had a seat at the table since you were born. You were born into that community, that table. Or maybe you're like me and you've just more recently joined. Each and every table represents real people. It represents real relationships. It represents real conversations, real memories, real experiences. It represents real hurt sometimes. And at other times it represents real healing. The table that Jesus sat at, it wasn't about the table. It wasn't about the table. It was about the people that were seated at the table. And here's just a small point of reflection for you today. You and I, we're the people that Jesus invites to the table. You and I, in all of our messiness, in all of our brokenness, in all of our imperfection, in all of our ugliness, in all of whatever you want to say about yourself, Jesus welcomes us to the table. And like Natalia said, like some people at the table, maybe it's not you, maybe it's the person sitting next to you. Don't nudge them though. You don't want them to know that you're thinking this about them. But like some people are impossibly hard to sit with at a table. Some people are impossibly hard to have at a table, to share a meal with. Maybe it's hard because we don't want to open ourselves up to them. Ever had that experience? You didn't want to open yourself up to someone, and there they are seated at the table. Maybe you were invited to a party, and you didn't know that that person was also invited to the party, and now you're both sitting there at the table, and you're not sure, like, can I be vulnerable in this moment? Maybe it's hard because you don't want to open yourselves up to them, but maybe you're afraid of them opening up to you. Maybe it's hard because we don't trust the other people at the table. Maybe it's just as simple as, I don't like them. I'm not going to ask anybody to raise a hand there. But I can imagine we've sat at those tables with those people that we might say, I don't like them. I don't want to sit with them. It's hard to sit at the table with some people for a whole number of potential reasons. What's your reason? You're thinking about it right now. And these people that sit at Jesus' table are hard people, just like you, just like me, to sit with. Now, Natalia mentioned Matthew, right? Like Matthew was this greedy guy. He was a tax collector. He was a bureaucrat. He was loyal to the system rather than the people, because the system and not the people, they compensated him well. Like the system is how he made his money, and he was all about money. He got rich by overtaxing the business leaders. He got rich by taking advantage of the system. Matthew, he didn't help the homeless. Think about this. He did not help the homeless. No, he actually caused homelessness. Matthew's love for money, his greed that I need to have more, it left little room, maybe even no room for loving people. And if you think about that for a minute, his greed, his love for money left little or no room for loving people. That sounds like the exact opposite of Jesus, doesn't it? Doesn't that sound like the opposite of Jesus? Did we ever hear Jesus say, hey, I'm going to take? No, Jesus, he said, I'm here to give. I'm here to serve. I'm here to bless. Matthew took. And Jesus gave, and gave. Matthew was greedy, but Matthew had a seat at the table. Matthew loved money more than he loved people, but Matthew had a seat at the table. Are you like Matthew? Are you greedy? Like, you really need to reflect on that and think about that. Like, where am I? Am I Matthew at this table? Am I always out there trying to make a little bit more for myself? Am I loving money so much? Am I loving things so much that I have little to no room left to love people? Am I Matthew? Are you Matthew? Even if you are, there's still a seat at this table. But what about Judas, right? Natalia mentioned Judas as well. Judas had a seat at the table. Judas might have been greedy. He might have wanted more money. He might have wanted more power or authority. Like, we don't really know fully what Jesus thought of Judas, but he gives us some really good ideas about what he thought of Judas. And I think what I take away when I read what Jesus had to say about Judas is that Jesus was not surprised by who Judas was. In Mark chapter 14, we read here that it says, on the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples, they asked him, where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover meal? What's interesting here is like this table that Jesus sat at with the 12 just a few hours before he was arrested, a couple days before he was dead and then raised again. Like, he sat at this table about 2,000 years ago, but the table, the Passover meal that he was sitting at to celebrate, that had been a table set 1,400 years before that. It's interesting to me because they're celebrating a Passover meal at a table, and that table had significance. And Jesus, he was sitting at this table with all these messy people, these greedy people, these betraying people. because he was going to redefine the table. So in verse 13 it says, he sent two of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water, he'll meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready, and make preparations for us there. Set the table there. Have seats for us there. Be ready to go in that space.'" And so the disciples, they left in verse 16. They went into the city and they found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. They set the table. They got ready for this special meal. And they didn't know what was going to take place at this meal. They didn't know that Jesus was going to redefine the table. And in verse 17, evening came. Jesus arrived. And while they were reclining at the table, relaxing at the table, having a good time at the table, eating at the table, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And if that wasn't like specific enough, he says, "One who is eating with me." Jesus knew each person. He knew every single name, every single story. He knew who they had been, and he knew who they were going to be. And he knew that Judas was going to betray him, and he had a seat for Judas at the table. Verse 19, they were saddened. The disciples, they were saddened. And one by one, they said to him, "Surely you don't mean me. Surely you don't mean me." It's almost this like self-reflection moment of, am I capable of that? Would I betray Jesus like that? Surely you don't mean me. Jesus said back, "It is one of the 12, one who dips bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man." And here's what he says about Judas, without Judas like fully understanding exactly at this moment. Like, it would be better for him if he had not been born. Yeah, now, could you imagine sitting at a table with Jesus and him saying, like, it'd be better if you just weren't born? Like, could you imagine sitting at a table with a friend or somebody you care about and them saying, like, oh, you know what? Like, it'd be better off if, like, you weren't born. Like, that has to hurt a little bit, and especially coming from somebody like Jesus who is shown to have so much grace, so much compassion, so much love. Like, this would sting just a little bit. And we could say a lot about Judas. Like, we could say, well, maybe he just had a bad day. Maybe he made a mistake. Maybe he didn't know what he was doing. Maybe he had really good intentions and he thought this was going to work out in Jesus' favor, right? Like, we could make all kinds of excuses for Judas, but that's just simply not the case. Like, we both know people like this, people that say, I have good intentions. It just didn't work out the way I thought it would. These are the people that they always know how to do it best. These are the people that they tell themselves, I know what's right. Like, I am not wrong. My way or the highway, Jesus. Like, I imagine that's what's going on in Judas's head. They know how to do it. They ignore every other voice out there. In some ways, they're delusional. In some ways, they have this weird understanding of who they are and forget who Jesus is. And the reality is, these people, these Judases, their good intentions are only good for themselves. Look at John chapter 6, right? A year before this, but a year before Jesus went to the cross, he says he knows that Judas is a devil. Like, Judas was here, and Jesus knew, like, his good intentions, if we're going to make that excuse for him, are only good for himself because he's a devil. Like, he is a guy that doesn't have good intentions. He isn't a good guy having a bad day. No, it's a bad guy. And he happens to hide it well. He hides it so well that every single person at the table is deceived and wonders, am I the one to betray Jesus? They don't suspect Judas. They first ask, am I the one? They were saddened and asked, surely you don't mean me. But Jesus, he knew who he was talking about. He quotes Psalm 41, saying, even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me. Even for Jesus, it hurts, it stings, it sucks. And even though Jesus knew where this was all going, it didn't make it any easier. So I come back to this question, the question that Natalia asked us earlier. Could you do it? Could you sit at this table knowing who's seated around you, knowing that you have some greedy, out for themselves people seated at this table with you? Would you be able to sit at this table knowing full well that somebody here is going to stab you in the back? Would you invite these people to your table? I don't know that I would. And if we're being honest, I don't think you would either. But that's Jesus. Jesus made room for the greedy. He made room for the people that were out for the betterment of themselves. He made room for the people that he knew would stab him in the back. He believed that they could be better. He believed that they could have a redemption story. He believed that their redemption story, because of doing life with him, would lead to more redemption stories down the line. As we go into the holidays, as we get ready for Thanksgiving and then Christmas and then New Year's and all the tables that we're going to be seated at, you've got family, you've got friends, you've got neighbors, coworkers, classmates, grandparents, aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews who are going to sit at your table. And some of those people are greedy people. Some of them are angry people. Some of them, they'll listen to all your stories and then they'll throw you under the bus a few days later and betray you and your trust. And it'll hurt. It'll sting. It'll suck. But Jesus gets it. Jesus gets it, and Jesus understands it, because at his table, there's room for those people. There's room for us. There's room for us, and we are those people. I think if we really want to do life different, if we really want to be more like Jesus today or tomorrow or in the weeks ahead, we should challenge ourselves to sit at these tables, to love people, to have grace, to have compassion, to believe that there is a redemption story inside of them. And if I can be Jesus to them, if I can show them what it looks like to love people that I know might hurt me in the end, if I can love them well, maybe Jesus will get a hold of their heart and their redemption story will turn into a redemption story for somebody else. That's why Jesus invites us to his table, because he sees a redemption story unfolding in us. My encouragement to you is to be fully engaged in that story. And to not just stay there, but to start engaging in somebody else's redemption story as well. By inviting them to your table, welcoming them in, and doing life alongside them. I think the world needs more people living out that kind of love, that kind of Jesus, that kind of person that believes there is redemption and hope in each and every one of us. Let me pray for us. God, you see so much more in us than we maybe even see in ourselves. God, we know that we're messy people. We know that we're broken people. And we know that you invite us to the table still. God, would we understand that there's more ahead? And would we live like you? Would we love like you? Would we sit at a table like the table you sat at? And would we be a part of someone else's redemption story? We pray all this in your name. Amen. Let's stand and close out in song.